Welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in John chapter 8. Now, this is a long chapter, and it is a discourse that Jesus is having with the Pharisees. And keep that in mind as we go through this chapter, because again, there's a lot to unpack. Okay, so I would, I can't resist but to just kind of unpack some of the statements that Jesus is making. Uh, but keep this in mind that he is addressing Pharisees, and these men were considered holy men. They boast of their moral superiority, which we're going to see in some of these verses. They enjoyed the esteem of people, the fame. And what Jesus is doing is exposing them for the hypocrites they are. That they, as he said in Matthew chapter 23, they lay heavy burdens on people that they themselves won't carry. That's the hypocrisy. And Jesus is exposing them. And people, you have to remember that if I was in the presence, if Jesus here was today in the presence of some of our religious leaders, we would be shocked that he would say such a things to such esteemed clergy. Okay, all right, so let's get to it. John chapter 8. I'm going to pick it up at verse 30. We kind of left off here in verse 30. He says, as he was saying these things, many believed in him. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him. Now, remember we said that this word, the phrase believe or believed, had believed him, okay, or believed in him. I'm not going to split hairs there, but the word believe, that there are different levels, of course, of belief. Now, in Mark chapter 4, when Jesus is talking about the parable of the sower of the seed, he gave 4 examples of how God sows his words into the hearts of people. And one of the examples he said, and the word is sown, and some believe for a while, but then when hardship comes, they offended. I'm paraphrasing here, but they are offended and fall away. The point is Jesus uses the term "they believe for a while," which means it's not saving belief, it's not saving faith. James gives us a teaching in his epistle in chapter 2 of what true faith produces, okay, as well as other scriptures. And that comes into play too, that there are people that walk away from. Remember in chapter 6, there are people that walked away from. There were disciples who walked away from. They believed. In fact, Jesus fed them. They believed. They got on the boat and came to follow, and they wanted some more food. Okay? All right. So he says, if you continue in my word, you really are my disciples. Now, this phrase here, if you continue in my word. So that phrase, I'm going to tell you, because I can't give you the exact wording, but there is some Greek grammatics, okay, that this exemplifies here. That, and sometimes you will hear Paul saying, in fact, let me show you this here. Let me go to Colossians chapter 1. And this would be a good example of this here. And there are other verses in which he he uses this. So watch this. Verse 21, Colossians 1, chapter 21 says, once you were alienated and hostile in your minds because of your evil actions, but now he has reconciled you by his physical body through his death to present you holy, faultless, and blameless before him. If, now get this, verse 23, if indeed you remain grounded and steadfast in the faith and are not shipped away from the hope of the gospel. So when you use the word if here, and the reason why I have to address it this way, because a lot of people try to put, they try to, well, there's a work by salvation. In other words, most of Christianity is hung up on works. They're hung up on, I have to do something in order to be saved. I have to do some good deeds, live holy, righteous living. I have to do something in order to make it to heaven. Okay. But that's not how Paul is using this phrase, if indeed you remain grounded and steadfast in the faith, because if you want to even, okay, go with that, that is how you then stay saved. This is how you are saved. Notice he said, if you are grounded. Now, oftentimes, and there are, again, there are other verses where you see this kind of phrase, if indeed, right? And as Jesus says here, if you continue in my word. So the way that the grammatics, the Greek grammatics play out is that it's stepping back and saying from a panoramic view that those who believe will continue in his word, or those who believe will remain in the faith, thus proving that they truly believe. Okay, truly believe. They are trust. They you could say that they truly believe. In other words, the word that God sown in their heart truly bore fruit. Okay. And by the way, this is the only time you will see a statement like this. So you never see a statement that says, if you continue in good works, if you continue living holy, you will be saved, or you are my disciples. The idea is that if you continue, John uses this a lot in his epistles, that the idea is that he said if you can commit sin, then you demonstrate, that's all, you demonstrate that you do not have God's love in you. And again, I'm paraphrasing that, but he said a lot of that in his epistle, his first epistle. So when he says, if you continue in my word, you really are my disciples, thus proving. Continuing in the word, then he says, you prove you are my disciples. That's kind of the grammatics there. So if you continue in my word, because remember, we already had an example of those who did not continue, right? You go back to chapter 6. Let's go back there. Let's see. Here we go. Let's look at verse 60, okay? And remember, this was the crowd that Jesus had fed. So he said, therefore, when many of his disciples heard this, they said, this teaching is hard. Who can accept it? And then Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples were complaining about this. Now notice he's calling them disciples. He asked them, does this offend you? The word offend means to cause to stumble. He says, then what if you were to observe the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? The Spirit is the one who gives life. The flesh doesn't help at all. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and they are life. But there are some of you who don't believe, for Jesus knew from the beginning those who would not believe and those who would betray him. So he said This is why I told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted to him by the Father. From that moment, verse 66, many of his disciples turned back and no longer accompanied him. Therefore, Jesus said to the 12, and there was from a larger group of people who were following him. Now he turned to the 12. You don't want to go away too, do you? Simon Peter answered, Lord, who will we go to? You have the words of eternal life. And we've come to believe that you are the Holy One of God. And Jesus replied, did I not choose you 12? Yet one of you is a devil. Now he's referring to Judas, of course. Now, very interesting exchange there, right? He didn't say, oh, thank you guys. He says, no, I chose one of you, but yeah, one of you the devil. Okay. So, but notice that many of them who were following him, they turned back and they did not continue. So this is kind of what is played out when you read it, okay? That some of them did not really believe truly. Okay, so he says, if you continue in my word, then you really are my disciples. So the disciples will always continue in faith. If a person walks away, and we have people today that are walking away. There was a man. He died a couple of years ago. That was, and this man, he did surprise me. But when you kind of understand this verse here, we can put this now into context. If you continue my word, there have been, and I won't. He after almost 40 years of ministry, just completely adapted a heretical view of the faith. And basically, he kind of coined the term inclusion, which it wasn't. The word might have been, but the teaching is the same. That a lot of people, they have a hard time believing that God is going to send people to hell. And what is interesting about that when he says that God is going to send people to hell, they can't grab a hold of that. They can't understand that. Okay. So hold on, let's see here. All right, let's see. Had a little glitch here. I'm back up. Okay, I'm back up. All right. So again, he said, if you continue in my word, then you really are my disciples indeed. So the work of God in us is an everlasting work. So the fact that Jesus says here, if you continue in my words, the statement, now remember this statement here, even though the discourse is with the Pharisees, but this statement is that there were some who were believing in him, which we will see later is going to be quite the conflict with some of these Pharisees, but they were believing in him. So that's why, again, he says, those who believe, if you continue in my word, you really are my disciples. If you're in terms of real disciples. And by the way, let me just say this, that the Matthew chapter 5, this is just a trivial. Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, which is known as the Sermon on the Mount or the Beatitudes, those three chapters, Jesus was talking to his disciples. In other words, this was the criteria for if you want to be my disciple. So when you read those 5 chapters, if you want to read those 5 chapters, that's Jesus was saying to his disciples. So he says, if you continue in my word, you really are my disciples. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So verse 33, he says, and this is again, remember, he said to those Jews who believed in him, here's their reply, right? Which kind of proves this point. Verse 33, we are descendants of Abraham. They answered him, we have never been enslaved to anyone. How can you say you will become free? Now, there's a lot to unpack with this statement here, because as they were speaking, they were under the rule of Rome. Now, notice he says, we are the descendants of Abraham. Now, there's something worth unpacking, that a true Israelite, a true Jew, is one that is the physical descendant. Now, I say that because what is going on in the Middle East today? What is going on with Israel, the land of Israel, and those who occupy the land? There's a lot of discussion that's going on. And especially when you go back to 1948, that, we just assume, we have assumed, I don't even know any longer, but we just assume that those who say they are Jews get in the land, right? Israel, and you say they are Jews. Now, Christians, they have, it's almost like, if you don't believe this, you're not a true Christian. And they say that based upon God's promise to Abraham, in which he says that God's promise to Abraham, that I will bless those that bless you, I will curse those who curse you. Now that scripture that's in Genesis, I believe it appears in chapter 12 and 15. Okay, one of the two. So now people then say, when you look at today, 1948, Israel, the Jews returned to the land, became a nation, and people see that as a fulfillment of prophecy. I do not. Several reasons, of course, we won't get into in terms of the details of why that's simply not true. Further, the people have, the only way you could really say if they are the descendants of Abraham, and that's the key. In other words, those who occupy the land. What is this discussion? Where did they come from? In 1948, where did they come from? Now, if they are the physical descendants of Abraham, should they not have genealogies to prove that? Now, I'm going to say, I don't know if they have them or not. I'm saying, if you say that they are the descendants of Abraham, there should be genealogies that should back that up. Now, they, at the time of this writing, they did have genealogies. They could back up their genealogies back to Abraham. Jesus himself was able at this time to back up with genealogy the claims that he was, I'm just show you quickly, that he was a child of Abraham. So let me see, where do I want to go? Matthew, because I'm running out of time. Here we go. So here is a genealogy. This is Jesus from Abraham, and as you can see, Abraham fathered Isaac, Isaac fathered Jacob, and as you can see, they come all the way down to even past, get this, past the exile, okay, And then you come all the way down to Jacob fathered Joseph, the husband of Mary, who gave birth to Jesus, who was called the Messiah. So this is the genealogy. Jesus is able to say at this time he is a true descendant of Abraham. The people that were arguing with Jesus could also follow their genealogy back to Jesus. Back to Abraham. Luke goes even back all the way to, actually, you see the genealogy that goes back to David, then to Abraham, and then Luke takes us all the way back to Adam, through Seth to Adam. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.